fmtraining.tv. My name is Margaret. I'll be your broadcast engineer for today. I'm here with the wonderful Calvin Moseman, who's been a senior engineer with us for many years. Hey, Calvin.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Yes, always good to have you. Cool. Let's discuss the schedule. So today we are doing an interesting little topic, navigation and screen sizes. Basically, how do you navigate between layouts and ways you can navigate between layouts. Also, layout objects that can manage screen real estate, slide control, tab control, popover windows, and also screens to different sizes. You need to have different sizes for your iPad, your iPhone, and your actual computer screen. That being said, if you'd like to support the channel, thank you very much. If you've bought one of these already, if not, I highly recommend it. We're doing a beginner series right now. We're really big on talking to beginner, intermediate, and advanced people on our live stream. But some people prefer not to have the interaction, or they don't like the fact that the streams are an hour long, or whatever issue they have with it, which is understandable. So we have these. These are really short, bite-sized videos that you can search for. They have excellent descriptions, notes, and all that jazz that you can look through and find any topic about FileMaker that you please. I think we are good. What are we doing today, Calvin?
So today we're looking at how to take advantage of the real estate on your layouts and getting the right size for depending on the device that you're using, and making sure that those match. Your design matches the use case for your app. So let's go ahead and I'll share my screen. And I'm going to start off by looking at FM starting point. And here's FM starting point. And usually when people are opening this and they're exploring it, we're doing it with FileMaker Pro on a Mac or Windows desktop computer. So we're doing it on the desktop side. And you'll notice in FM starting point, we do a lot of organization with the layouts and such, dividing them up into different groups. We've got the mouse layouts, which are specifically for a desktop where you would be accessing the layouts with a mouse. We've got the touch layouts, which you would be accessing through a device like an iPad. And then we've got the iPhone layouts or the phone layouts, which you would be accessing on a phone device, so a much smaller screen. And let's take a look at how we manage these different areas. So one thing that we do here is we try to keep a standard size from one area to another. And when you're working on a desktop layout, you don't want the window to jump around every time that you move. Sometimes I'll see apps where at the end of every navigation script, script that takes you from one place in the app to another ends with an adjust window resize to fit. And it will immediately change the window size all over the place. So if you're working on if maybe you want the window to be smaller, and then it will jump back to being the full size. Maybe you want it bigger. Now I've got my window shrunk down so it's a little easier to see, but maybe you want it bigger and you want it to fill the screen, and then at the end of that script, it always brings it back down to size. And so I like to give the user the option of how big or small they want the screen size, and then allow the app to work within that. So we'll notice here the buttons that we're using are all smaller for using the mouse. But if we go to the layouts for touch, now what I'm going to do here actually is I've got my iPad ready, and I'm going to pull open the iPad screen so you can see what FM starting point looks like on an iPad. So one thing we'll see here, and we'll compare these, is that so we go to, let's go back home. The home screen for the touch, for the iPad, and for the desktop mouse layouts are really similar. They've got this landscape view, but you'll notice everything we do on the touch side, it allows us to resize into portrait mode. So you'll notice that these graphs on the right side are changing. I'm going to go back to portrait or landscape mode there, and it stretches real nicely. Now, if we go over here and look at our accounts, now we could do something similar to the home button here. We can make these graphs stretch just like that. But when we get over to something like this, like the accounts, this detail view, or the contacts, it's really hard to make something that goes nicely into a portrait view with this, at the same time as keeping this left to right navigation. So you'll notice here, everything on the kind of design flow here is that you've got less specific stuff to the left, and as you read to the right, we get more and more specific for looking at this person's record. So we can find a person's record in this list on the left, and then we narrow down, oh, this is the person, this is their information, and then these are specific notes about that person. And so we read it left to right. Now, and with portrait mode, let's go ahead and open this back up and open contacts, just so we can see that we're looking at the same data here. It's thinking about it. Is that working now? There we go. So you'll see here, this is more of a portrait orientation. We can turn it on its side, and it stretches pretty nicely. You can go through there and see all the information, but it also works on this portrait mode as well. And we accomplish this through anchoring. This resizing that we do on all these layouts is with anchoring. Before we take a look at anchoring, do we have any questions at this point?
Nope, just a comment from someone they mostly developed for WebDirect on desktop. They're curious how that'll play into considerations, which is kind of interesting.
So with WebDirect, because you're using a mouse, it has more to do with how the person's interacting with the app than necessarily whether. So if you're developing for somebody that's using a mouse and on desktop, whether it's WebDirect or FileMaker Pro, you're going to be using the same kind of mouse kind of interactions. But if you're doing WebDirect on a tablet, you're going to be using more the idea of somebody using their fingers, which are not as refined, or they're not as it's not as easy to click on small buttons as it is with a mouse. So you're going to be using bigger buttons and maybe using larger fields and such. So let's go to this desktop layout that we're looking at here. And I am going to just show a couple things here. So when we look at this navigation, this on the left, we've got this portal that's a master detail portal that lists all of the records in the found set. And we'll see our anchoring here, or it's called auto sizing. I keep saying anchoring because this used to be called anchoring, and it actually used to be anchors instead of locks. So you'll notice that it's locked to the left, or they still call it anchor. If you hover over that, anchor appears. So I'll keep calling it anchoring. So if it's anchored to the left and anchored to the top and anchored to the bottom, it keeps it to the left side and allows it to stretch up and down. Now, if I remove the anchoring from the bottom, go into browse mode, and I'm going to just use Command minus to make this a little smaller, you'll see that as we drag this down, the portal did not resize with the window. Let's go ahead and turn that back on. Now that I enabled the anchoring to the bottom of the screen again, it drags down as well. So that allows things to grow larger. That's really handy with trying to expand a portal up and down. You can see more records as the window resizes. Now let's see what happens when we anchor to the right. So it's anchored on the left. To keep it on the left, I'll enable the right. See what happens. It doesn't look like anything changed. But as soon as I start dragging the window wider, you'll see that because it's anchored to the right, it stretches that layout object as you resize things. So sometimes we'll run into a situation where we do our development, we work on an app, and we never resize the window. We made it the perfect size, and no one should ever resize the window. It should just stay right where it is. And then somebody tries it out and they move the screen size, make it wider, and they say all the buttons disappeared. This doesn't look like it looked in the screenshot you sent me. And one thing to check if that happens is your anchoring to see if it's covering anything up, if something's going off screen, etc. So let's go fix the anchoring back there. Oh, well, and let's look at one other thing that we can have happen. And so I just removed the anchoring now. So I removed it from the right and from the left. So what do we think is going to happen here? It looks fine right now, but again, when I resize it, we'll find out that it's actually floating. If there's no anchoring, it's just going to float there in the middle of the window. And we do use that for in some cases. So one case where we do use that, let's jump to another record, is watch this select or add note indicator saying that there's no note selected. It's hovering there because it has no anchoring. It's just floating there. Well, floating is good for maybe a note like this select or add note option, but it's not really good for our master detail portal. So I'm going to anchor that back to the left, and now we're back. Now we're back in business. It's looking right. Do we have any questions about anchoring as we looked at anchoring there? And just to note, everything here has some kind of anchoring. You'll see this object has anchoring on all 4 sides. That allows it to grow bigger. This portal, it matches the portal over here, the anchoring on the left, top and bottom. And you'll notice so while that text in the background here, the no note, it has no anchoring so that it hovers. The text field here has anchoring all around that makes it expand and grow bigger. Any questions there?
Nope, I don't see any. So.
Okay. Let's keep going. So one thing that you might run into, or that people do sometimes, is when they start developing an app, is that they stick a whole bunch of buttons all over the place. So let's just create a new button. And I'm just going to call this one new button. And as you finds a button that, as you develop different buttons that do different things, maybe you think these are the greatest buttons ever, and and you want all the options available all the time. So we're just going to, let's copy this, copy. We're just going to put buttons everywhere. And we'll put some up here. And we're starting to, and now let's go to browse mode and check this out. See what, because we got all these great automations here. We talked about scripting yesterday and how scripting can be great and do a bunch of things. So now we've got all these buttons. We're kind of cluttered with buttons now. Oh, there's a space over here. I can add some more. So let's add some buttons over here. Got a button there, button here, one more button, and one more right there. So now we've got all of these buttons all over the place, and it's getting really overwhelming though. And we need to make sure that we take advantage of some of the layout objects that we have to not have all these layouts in our face all the time. So there's this rule that we called the 80-20 rule. And the idea is that 80% of your users use probably 20% of your app. Most of them don't need all of the buttons to be visible all the time. Probably most of them only need a few buttons most of the time, and there's a few, maybe administrator people, super users that use your app that will want all of the rest of these buttons. So what we can do is maybe give them an options area where we can hide those buttons and take advantage of our real estate and have a little more space on our layout. So here I'm going to go to our popover button, select the button tool, and then select popover button, and create a new button here. It's a popover. I'm going to give it this meatball indicator, and we can actually give it a name. Sometimes people don't like just seeing that. They wonder what it means, and we'll say options. This hopefully is real clear that these are the options that they have for doing different actions on this layout. And as people get more familiar with your design and using an options popover, then they'll start looking for the options button on every layout, and they'll expect it to be there. So here, let's look at how much cleaner this is. It's going to be easier to find buttons now that they're all in one place. And it's going to be easier for people to figure out what to do instead of hunting and pecking all around the layout. And you can even have, it's not against the rules to have two, oops. Let's make sure I've got this. And it's okay to have two rows of buttons or two columns of buttons. And let's just finish getting these buttons over here. Okay, let's go back to now. We can make these all nice and organized just real quick. Align them all, space them out. There we go. We go back to browse mode. So now we cleaned up all of those buttons that we had all over the place, cluttering our layout, and we can just jump over to this options area, and you can put a whole bunch of different buttons that do different actions, especially if you have a lot of reporting. It'd be a great place to stick them into this options area. And it works, having these popovers, they work in Pro, Go, and WebDirect. Another place that you could put them is in a card window, and card windows now work in WebDirect, so that's a great option there as well. Do we have any questions about about optimizing your layouts and putting buttons in popovers so we don't clutter the layout so much?
There's a question about desktop resolution. Is there a standard desktop screen resolution that I should build for?
Oh, so this would depend on your client. So you'd have to ask your client, what's the biggest screen or what's the smallest screen people are going to be working on? So what you don't want to do, I'm currently working on a 27-inch monitor, and it's 4K. So I can make everything really giant and fill my 4K screen and have all these nice columns and make it look beautiful. But then if my users are doing all of their work on laptops, and some of my users don't, they use laptops across the board, then you would want to make sure that you're trying to tailor that down to whatever their smallest laptop size is. And so generally you start with your smallest and then expand from there. And so that's definitely a consideration, but there's no standard across the board. It's you have to think about who is going to be using the app. And so one of the nice guides here that we have, if you go into layout mode and look at your this just below the toolbar, we've got layout, and then it tells us the table name and then the theme, and then there's this area here called show or hide screen and device dimensions, and you click on it and it turns on or off the screen device dimensions. If you select the arrow down next to it, you can highlight which sizes you want to appear on your layout. And so what these do is they put like a stencil on the layout so you can see how big that screen size is for your to compare your app to. So we've got desktop 640 by 480. That's really small. And let me go ahead and enable that one. So that's small. I'm not seeing it though. Why is it not appearing? Is it actually bigger than I think? Okay, so I guess I had to resize the window, or maybe I just didn't see it. So here it is. You'll see that it encompasses from the left of the screen over to about estimates down to this our information tabs down here. So pretty small layout, but this is probably the size of a lot of apps that were developed in FileMaker 9 or 10. sometimes I run across those that were designed on big, deep monitors that they were big monitors, but they had tiny resolutions compared to our 4K displays today. And sometimes you open it up and you immediately know this was developed on a really low resolution screen. But you can go up to get the line out here for, what is this, 1600 by 1200, and you'll see the FM starting point is quite a bit smaller. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't develop in this size? No, but if your client needs to see something that size and has screens that will accommodate that size, then definitely take advantage of the real estate and use it. So these are quick guides to kind of see different options that there are for how you might size the layouts in your app. Do we have any follow-up questions on the screen size?
Not on screen size, but for phone sizes. The phone sizes. Are the viewports with or without the top bar of your iPhone with battery and Wi-Fi information?
Oh, that is a good question. What is that? So let's do we want to try to do a test there?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Let's try that. Let's try that. So here we have iPhone 14, iPhone 14, iPhone 13 mini, iPhone 13 mini landscape. Okay, so we got portrait and landscape, and then iPhone SE3 portrait and landscape. Now my phone is here, and this is let's go here. Let's find FileMaker. So here's the iPhone screen. Oh, it went to landscape. So that's what landscape looks like. That's what portrait looks like. And this one has the notch in it. So you can see that the notch isn't displayed in this, but if you look at my thing, you can see that there is a notch on it. Okay. So what we're going to do here, let's go ahead and go to the phone layouts, and we're going to open up so it says here data entry web. I think this is the one we want. So we'll make that smaller. So here it is on let's look at the same record. Okay. So here it is on desktop on the right, and on the iPhone on the left, and you'll see one thing going on here. One thing that's going on here is that the iPhone is stretching. So there's anchoring going on here, and it's stretching that window out a little bit. And because these screens were originally developed when FileMaker Go was first brought to iPhone. And so I think they were designed to accommodate like an iPhone 4 or something like that, a really small screen size. And even the smallest size that Apple sells now is much larger than that. So let's go ahead and go into layout mode here. And what I'm going to do is use a button bar. And one of the cool things about a button bar is you can put a calculation in here. And I'm going to say get window content height. And and then get window content width. So we're going to get the height by the width. And let's see. Let's just put it in default. I'm going to put it right here. And I'm going to make this so it stretches. So by default, it's going to anchor to the top and the left. Well, let's see if that's going to be big enough. So we just saved it here. Now I need to open my screen again. And let's go back to our list. There we go. So here it's saying it's 657 by 375. And I guess we did window content height. So let's try that one more time. What we're going to do here is now we're going to say window height and window width. Okay, let's try that. So I guess our question here is 812 minus 657, the height of the whole toolbar. I think that is going to be the height of the whole toolbar. So they're counting the area with, I would guess that they are counting the area with the time. I'm sorry, what was the original question here? I got caught up with figuring out the dimensions.
Are the viewports with or without the top bar of your iPhone with battery and Wi-Fi information? With the stencils, basically.
Oh,
Is it
okay. So we're looking at the content height. So I guess the question will be so if you do a 3-finger swipe down or 3-finger swipe up on your phone or your iPad, it will hide the toolbar. So I just made the toolbar disappear, and our height didn't change, but our content height did. Did our content height change? Oops. I don't think that changed at all. Hide that.
doesn't look like it.
So I feel like let's put a refresh on here.
I have to say, do you need to refresh the calculation?
So here we go. Let's go ahead, and what I'll do is single step, and this will be refresh object, and we're going to say button 1. Okay, and we got to name this button now. Call this one button 1. We'll call this one button 2, and we'll have this one do the same thing, perform script. Actually, we'll do single step. Refresh object. This is button 2. Okay, browse mode. Okay, so let's go back to here. And oh, so now you'll notice that it refreshed since the last time we looked at this. So the question is, on the iPhone mini, what the number is. So you'll notice that, so I think it's going to be the content, but let's find out. So here, the mini, now this is actually a mini 12. So maybe the mini 13 is a little different, but it's saying 712 by 357 or 354. Well, this is telling me 728 by 375. I'm going to guess that the mini that they're saying here is, let's put the mini landscape and portrait on our screen. I'm going to guess that the mini that they're saying is not including the toolbar. And so it is without the toolbar, but it does not include the navigation what is it called? The time and the battery and such at the top. I don't think that's counted. The other thing you'll notice here, I don't know, does it go all the way to the bottom? Interestingly, you'll notice that our button is our field is anchored to the bottom, but it doesn't actually go all the way to the bottom here. If I turn it sideways, does it go to the bottom? Well, maybe that's just the way that it shows. Oh, and this is interesting too. You'll notice that on the right and left, when I'm in landscape mode, it doesn't actually go all the way to the right and left, because this is about where the screen starts to bend on the phone. So interesting things there. I would say that it's not, those sizes don't include the time and battery information. Good question. Took a little while to figure that one out.
It's an
Any other
interesting
questions?
Yeah. Do you use get window desktop width to jump to layouts depending on the device?
Get window desktop width to jump to layouts depending on device. Yeah, that's a good question. So Usually I will say, let's get application version, and that will tell me which layouts to go to. So if it says FileMaker Go and doesn't have iPad in the name, then I know that it's the iPhone. If it says Go and iPad, then I know it's the iPad. And then if it's anything else, then it's going to be desktop. The one place where it would be a little more critical to know what the window screen size is for WebDirect. So I don't think you can tell on WebDirect whether you are on a mobile device, a tablet, or a phone, or a desktop. So in that case, you can get the screen size and then decide, okay, based on this, we're going to show you the touch screens. Based on this, we're going to show you the desktop screens. Based on this being so small, we're going to go to the phone screens. And I think FM Starting Point actually does something like that. If we go to Manage Scripts and go to the Startup script, what is the startup script called? Maybe it's called Start. Startup, there we go. So here, if I do a find, is there something for web? Let's just see what it says for WebDirect. Pro client. So resizes. Okay, so here it is. So if the device is 5, that means it's an Android phone. Then we're getting the desktop height and the desktop width to determine what size it is, and then decide which layout we should go to, whether we go to the iPhone screen or the phone screen, or whether we go to the touch screen, or whether we go to the mouse screen. So if you want to check that out in FM Starting Point, it's in the startup script around line 216.
There you go, David.
Good question.
We have another question.
Yeah.
Does putting slide controls and popovers hinder performance? I've been doing that while using a button bar for navigation between slides, mimicking tab control.
Okay, so is a slide control better for performance than a tab control? I don't think either of those are going to make much of a difference. Slide control is a lot nicer to control with the button bars, but with the tab control, it's sometimes it's easier to maintain because you don't have to use scripts. But what's really going to cause performance hit is what is on those. If you have a sorted portal that references hundreds of records, that's going to take a chunk of your performance. So it's probably more what's on them than the actual layout objects themselves. Also, especially if you're on WebDirect, you want to make sure that you're not using custom CSS on those objects. That's going to slow things down, and it'll make things flash more if they don't have they'll flash more if they do have custom CSS. And just to kind of look at what that is, and unfortunately, I don't think FM Starting Point really went too deep into custom setting the CSS on these objects. You'll see these two new buttons. I just used the default button bar options. So these are part of the Tranquil Touch theme. There's no red here, so I know that it's CSS from the theme. Now here, the calendar button, it has a red indicator, which means that it has custom CSS. So this is going to render more slowly than a button that is assigned to a CSS style. So that would be one thing. That's probably going to be the biggest thing for performance on the layout objects in and of themselves. Good question.
Can't you determine the screen size via scripting duration, the launch of the app, and deploy accordingly automatically?
The script duration? I'm not sure what's meant by that. Using a get function to get so usually when let me pull up my data viewer. So if we say get application version, say evaluate. So here I know it's FileMaker Pro. If I do this on the iPad, so let's go ahead and or the iPhone. Let's go ahead and save this, monitor. Go back over here and we'll just duplicate my button and say, get application version. We'll put a few different things in here. Get application architecture, get system version. So here's a bunch of interesting things that could be helpful in determining what's going on with the user. So I think I said application language. I know it's what that is. Okay, so here we see it's Pro 20. It's an ARM64, and the system version. Version, yeah, is 12.4. Now, if I go over to my iPhone, let's go ahead. Now we see it's Go and version 20, ARM64 once again, and 16.5. So based on stuff like this, it's pretty easy to tell where the user is, as opposed to using a script duration. I'm not even sure how a script duration would be, how we would go about using that. Good question, though. Any follow-up questions or clarifications on that?
Sorry, not duration, but during. So the question would be, can't you determine the screen size via scripting during the launch of the app and deploy automatically? Doesn't the startup script do that?
Yeah, that's exactly what we looked at the startup script. So this is probably easier to figure out based on these get functions, but when those aren't available on something like WebDirect, it's a little bit more ambiguous. Then we go to the screen size and we can figure out from there. Yeah, during the startup. That makes a little more sense. Thank you for that clarification. As you're going through different platforms, you'll notice some differences between the display of different buttons, especially text on buttons. So one thing that you want to be sure of is how the text appears. So let me go ahead and just show you something here. So let's make this a little shorter. Depending on what platform you're on. So you'll notice here, I probably need to get this to refresh. Oh, it looks like it's fine. Let me make that a little shorter. If we go 28. So this is really interesting. So in the past, in FileMaker Go, we would notice that the text seemed a little taller than in FileMaker Pro. So if you wanted something to work on both platforms, then you would have to just make sure all of your text, all of your buttons, all of your text objects, everything was just a little bit taller than you would necessarily want, or that necessarily looked, if it looked good on Pro, it might not look good on Go. But you'll notice here with this G, it's cutting off at the exact same place. This actually looks really good. And so maybe that's not so much a problem with Go. It still is an issue, though, between FileMaker Pro on Mac and FileMaker Pro on Windows. You'll notice on Windows, the text is a little wider. So you might get text if you develop on Mac and then you want to check it on Windows. Sometimes those text blocks aren't quite wide enough. You'll need to stretch them out, or else text will be cut off in those text objects. But I'm actually in this demo here, I thought I was going to show you it getting cut off in one and not the other, but they look pretty similar, which is interesting. Maybe it's not so much a consideration.
Yeah, FM Go and WebViewer give smaller fonts than on FM Pro. I hadn't really thought about the fact of take fonts into account.
Yeah, fonts are a big consideration, especially if I've had one client that switched from Mac to Windows, and actually they called us because they switched to Windows and they thought, my computer, my app just died. Something's terrible. It's corrupted. And what happened was nobody had ever seen the app except on a Mac. And then switching to Windows, all of the text on almost every layout was too narrow. And so we just went through and made everything just a little bit wider and fixed it. And I think we actually fixed it in an hour or less. It was and got them going again. But another thing to consider, the text, just making sure everything looks right. Another thing that you want to look at as far as jumping from one platform or another is the button sizes. Obviously, if you're clicking on something with a mouse, it can be pretty small. But when you go to something like an iPhone, you want something that people can click on pretty easily without having to punch around and look at different and fail a bunch of times first. And that's one of the things that the CSS helps us with, is standardizing those button sizes. So here it's kind of forcing our buttons to be how tall? They want them to be about 44 points tall, which makes it really easy to grab with your finger. So if I go back to browse mode, whatever it was at was pretty easy to grab as well, but this is just that much easier.
No questions, just kind of a comment that when customers ask for iPhone or phone or iPad layouts in general, it's frustrating because the layouts aren't responsive, and new iPhones come out how often? Every year? Every other year? So the sizing
every
changes
year, but
quickly.
I don't know if the sizing changes every year.
Yeah,
so with those, you want to know what the smallest phone they're going to be using is, and then have everything work on that size, and then you can stretch to any of the larger sizes. In general, people don't switch to smaller iPhones. Generally, people go bigger. So if you start with a smaller one, like the FM starting point might be a good example. We made this work on these iPhone 4 or whatever it was, a really old one that was a really small screen size that isn't available anymore, but it stretches decently on this newer screen that's much, much larger. I would say make it look good on the smaller screen, then it can expand up.
Hold on, we got another question.
Yeah. What would be the correct thing to use the application? Does it depend on how many devices I'm going to use it so it looks okay? Or did you recommend to see it well on all teams? Usually, so you'll notice, I think we're saying which should we use make a screen work on for all devices, or should it just be on one and then make it work everywhere else? Now, the thing about trying to get something to work everywhere is that it's going to look good on one place and not on anywhere else. So I have most of my clients use the desktop FileMaker Pro for most things, and they use the iPhone or iPad limitedly. So for most of them, I develop for FileMaker Pro, and then we do additional layouts. So if I go to, you can use a mouse. So if you see what I'm doing here, I did my 3-finger drag to pull down the menu. I'm going to click on this arrow button. I'm going to go to the layouts, go to the mouse layouts, and I'm just going to scroll down to accounts and data entry. Okay, now this loads. Look at that. Now I can't get the entire navigation bar because it's a top navigation which doesn't resize. But you'll see I can actually kind of zoom in and see these things. That's great. I can come over here and kind of see the client information a little bit and go here. This looks great. And then I can go here and dig into these, create a new note. There we go. But you'll notice this is like a terrible experience. I can do it, but it's not that great. So one thing that you can do if you design an app like FM Starting Point, and you want to take FM Starting Point, or you're using FM Starting Point maybe, and you want to say, I want this, but I want it on the iPhone. What you can do is grab this. You'll notice there's these different vertical columns. The data is organized in columns. We've got this list. You could take this list here and put it on its own layout. So that would be layout 1. And by selecting one of these names, it takes you to layout 2, which would be, and actually let's go these side by side. So this would be layout 1 with your list of names, and then layout 2 is going to be, let's try to get this to stay there. Layout 2 is going to be this, the demographic information. And then you might have to have multiple layouts for the sub information to view notes, contacts, and such. So on the iPhone, so it doesn't usually make sense to try to make a screen that works everywhere. The closest thing you could get was maybe a screen that works for desktop and iPad. I did have a project where most of the users were going to be on iPad, so I just made it work on iPad. And then a few of them are on desktop, and so they can use those iPad screens on the desktop pretty easily as well. But if trying to get something to work on iPhone as well, usually you want separate layouts, just like FM Starting Point does. That we've got phone layouts, desktop, and iPad layouts. Separating those out is the easiest. That answer the question. Any follow-up?
I'll let them get that. They're on Twitch, so it's like a 60-second delay. So
okay. That's okay. So just to kind of recap what we've talked about the differences between different platforms and different devices, and how you want to have screens for each of those devices, thinking about the button sizes, the text object sizes, and making sure those look good in each of those use cases. And obviously you want to have your computer that you're working on, and then you want to have whatever device your users are going to have, so you can test what that looks like, whether that's a phone, iPad, smaller screen, Windows screen, whatever that is that they're going to be you want to see it the same way that they will, so that you can understand what their experience is going to be.
Yes, no, all very important. And as someone said earlier, it's just something that you would do once or very rarely. So having a refresher is always good. Or at least it's not, even if you do it way more than once, which I'm sure many developers do, it's not something you do often.
All right. Thanks for joining us today.
And absolutely. Thank you for coming. Seriously, it's always good to have you on the show. Thank you very much for filling in these last couple days. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's good to see you guys. You all have a lovely Wednesday. I almost said Monday. I don't know why I almost said Monday. All of you have a lovely Wednesday, and we will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow will be fun. All right, bye.
Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir!